When South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20th, 1860, a dragoon captain by the name of Richard H. Anderson would resign his commission with the U.S. Army and join his home state. Anderson would be made colonel of the 1st South Carolina Regulars on December 28, 1860, and then he would be moved over to Charleston Harbor following PGT Beauregard's capture of Fort Sumter on April 14th. Around late May and early June, Anderson was made overall commander of Charleston Harbor, and then he was promoted to brigadier general on July 19th. After this, he was sent over to Pensacola, Florida, and would take command at the Battle of Santa Rosa Island on October 9, 1861, and during this battle he was hit in the left elbow and would have to recover for several months. He would be finally ready and back in action by February of 1862 in Johnston's Army of the Potomac. Upon this reassignment, Richard H. Anderson would be given a brigade under Longstreet's overall command, and he would take part in the Peninsula Campaign, fighting in the battles of Williamsburg on May 5th and Seven Pines on May 31st through June 1st. In these battles, Anderson distinguished himself as a bold and aggressive leader, earning the nickname Fighting Dick at the Battle of Seven Pines when he took over Benjamin Huger's former division and led it with good success. On June 1st, Joe Johnston would be wounded at the battle, and Robert E. Lee would assume command of all the Confederate forces in the area, renaming it the Army of Northern Virginia. In his reorganization, he saw Anderson was a solid and bold leader and would promote him to the rank of Major General on July 14, 1862. He would do this after the 7 days battles. Fresh into division command, Anderson would take part in several more battles like Second Bull Run, where he was part of Lee's counterattack on John Pope's exposed position. After their victory, the Confederates would invade the North, and Anderson himself would again see combat, this time at the Battle of Antietam on September 17th. His division held the Sunken Road in this battle, and it would be a bloody affair, with he himself getting shot in the thigh and carried off the battlefield. After nearly 3 months of recovery, Richard H. Anderson would be back in action for the Battle of Fredericksburg on December 11, 1862. In this battle, his division held the far left flank of the Confederate line just on Marye's Heights. He would not be heavily engaged during this battle. Several months later, on May 1st through the 2nd, 1863, Major General Richard H. Anderson would be holding the center to left of the Confederate line at the Battle of Chancellorsville. He would do this until he was ordered to protect the Confederate rear with his division following Major General John Sedgwick's 6th Corps breakthrough at the Fredericksburg defenses. Anderson would go ahead and create a 3-mile defense line at Salem Church and hold off Sedgwick's 6th Corps. And, at the end of the day, the Confederates saw victory at the Battle of Chancellorsville. This gave them another reason to invade the North, in which they did, and they would be there for a couple of months. And then they would see battle again near the town of Gettysburg on July 1st, 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg had begun, but Major General Richard H. Anderson would not be present on the field on the first day of fighting, as his division was still marching up to meet his comrades, and he would arrive later in the day. On the second day of battle, July 2nd, his division was tasked with attacking Cemetery Ridge, following up the Emmitsburg Road to hit Humphreys' division. He would do this, but Anderson would show a lack of initiative and drive when it came through breaking through the Union lines, as one of his brigade commanders, Brigadier General Ambrose Wright, would break through the Union lines and then be driven back due to a lack of support. Overall, throughout the entire course of the battle, Anderson would have a hard time controlling his brigades and would be noted as staying back behind the officers when it came to leading his men. On July 3rd, his division would take part in Pickett's charge and would be driven back with heavy casualties. Overall, the Battle of Gettysburg stood as a stain on Anderson's whole career. After the Battle of Gettysburg, the Army of Northern Virginia would again experience another era of reorganization, in which a certain Major General Richard H. Anderson and his division would find themselves under Lieutenant General A.P. Hill's overall command in the 3rd Corps, a position they were assigned back in June of 1863, but would now be permanent and for over a year. In 1863, after Gettysburg, the Army of Northern Virginia would fight in a few more battles, in which, again, another certain Richard H. Anderson would serve in. These would be battles like Bristow Station, where he unsuccessfully attacked the Union left on October 14th, and Mine Run, where he held the Confederate right going from November 27th to December 2nd. After all these battles, the Army would go into winter quarters and would be back in action for the Wilderness Campaign. The Battle of the Wilderness began on May 5, 1864, and Major General Richard H. Anderson and his division would command a section of the Confederate right under Lieutenant General A.P. Hill's overall command. This battle saw fierce, ferocious, and bloody action going from the left to right of the lines, and men dropped in the thousands. One of these men would be Lieutenant General James Longstreet, as he dropped on May 6, commanding his 1st Corps. Major General Richard H. Anderson would take command of this corps and lead it throughout the rest of the battle until May 7th, in which he would remain in command of the corps, leading it through a forced march of the night of May 7th and arriving at Spotsylvania Courthouse on May 8th, setting up a defensive position at Laurel Hill. He would hold this position until May 12th and remain in the area until May 21st when the battle ended. Seeing how well he did at Corps Command, General Robert E. Lee promoted Richard H. Anderson to the rank of Lieutenant General on May 31st. Right after his promotion, Lieutenant General Richard H. Anderson would immediately see combat on the field of Cold Harbor. The Cold Harbor action started on May 31st, and Lieutenant General Richard H. Anderson, along with Lieutenant General A.P. Hill, would both hold their corps on the Confederate right, digging massive earthworks and successfully holding off the Union attack until June 12th, when the Union Army would march to the Confederate right and then lay siege to Petersburg. Lieutenant General Richard H. Anderson would command his 1st Corps through the Petersburg defenses all the way until October 19th, when Lieutenant General James Longstreet recovered from his wounds, in which Lieutenant General Richard H. Anderson would be given a newly made 4th Corps from some leftover divisions. He would still hold the Petersburg defenses until its breakthrough. The breakthrough would happen on March 25th, 1865, with the siege lasting several months, itself starting on June 9th. Lieutenant General Richard H. Anderson and his 4th Corps would act as a rear guard to General Robert E. Lee's retreating forces to Appomattox, and Anderson's command would get wiped out at the Battle of Saylor's Creek on April 6, the rest of his units joining the 2nd Corps. With now no command available to his rank, Richard H. Anderson would be sent home to South Carolina, where he assumed command of a cavalry brigade, but would never surrender. He would be later pardoned on September 27, 1865, and this would be the end of his Civil War career. When taking a look at Richard H. Anderson's Civil War career, he could be seen as a steady, reliable, and trusted commander overall. Now, let's go ahead and look at some of his key moments and his different levels of command that gave him these features. At brigade level, Richard H. Anderson was known as a bold and aggressive attacker, being able to hold his ground at Williamsburg and fight with determination at Seven Pines, though not making a significant breakthrough. At divisional level, he could be seen as a reliable defensive commander, being able to hold his ground in key moments like in Antietam in the Bloody Lane, Fredericksburg on the extreme left, and making a massive redeployment at Chancellorsville, making a 3-mile defensive line in the Confederate back at Salem Church. Though he was not spared from the Gettysburg disease, one that plagued many commanders in the battle with indecisive action and lack of follow-up on their troops. This would be a stain on his overall record. When it came to Corps Command, Richard H. Anderson did well with what he was suited with, taking over Longstreet's 1st Corps in the Battle of the Wilderness and holding its ground until the end of the fight. He would also hold its ground at Laurel Hill at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse and again at Cold Harbor, seeing some of the bloodiest action of the war in that battle. And at Petersburg, Richard H. Anderson would successfully hold himself firm like the other Corps commanders did. But that would be the last time he held the line, because on April 6, 1865, his command was wiped out at the Battle of Saylor's Creek, being overwhelmed and routed from the field, having to join the 2nd Corps with its remnants. This would be the last time Richard H. Anderson would ever be in command of a battle. Thank you guys for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button for more notifications. I make history content and whatever I can think of here. So that's all I have to say. See you guys next time, and bye-bye.